All right, in this video segment, we're going to look further into Chapter 9 and cover some more of these traits that are known to be linked to criminal behavior. I neglected on the last point on this slide to talk about the dark triad. And this is a well-developed area of research in psychology, which looks at three traits that are known to be that have specifically have been linked to criminal behavior. And so it's in contrast to the big five personality traits we talked about in the last segment, which are designed to sort of describe and help us understand people in general. They were not developed to try to predict crime. The dark triad was designed specifically to predict criminal behavior. So there's three parts to that dark triad, of course, meaning three. Narcissism number one, Machiavellianism number two, and psychopathy number three. Now, psychopathy, let's do that one first just because we're most familiar with that one, I would assume. And even though there's a lot of traits which we potentially could talk about more later, just to keep things short at this point, I think we can do a pretty good job of summarizing what we mean by psychopathy, by someone being a psychopath, by simply saying that a psychopath is someone who tends to look at other people not as people, but as objects to be exploited. That you're not a human being with feelings and rights, just the same as the perpetrator. You're just an object. So a psychopath may look at you as, no different than something useful, like a tool. I can make use of this person to get what I want. And then when I get what I want from this person, then I just toss them aside, like an old tool that's no good to me anymore, kind of a thing. So it's, of course, it's lack of conscience and other things that you usually think of when you think of a psychopath as someone who's manipulative and very deceitful and shallow, charming in sort of a shallow way, that kind of thing. But anyway, I think the core aspect of it is this sort of lack of being able to see other people as being human beings in the full sense. Okay, so that's the third one. Let's move to the first one, narcissism. And so narcissism is when you have a really inflated sense of your own importance. You think that the rules don't apply to you because you're better than everybody else, you're above everybody else, and the rules might apply to them, but you're special, you're unique, and so all the exceptions should be made for you. And so it's a really exaggerated, inflated sense of self-importance. So if you were to compare it to like a healthy self-esteem, it's not that you feel good about yourself and that you think that you're a decent person and as good as anybody else. Instead, it's something exaggerated, inflated, and really where you're going to see other people as being low and unimportant compared to yourself. So that sort of person, you can see the connection with that in psychopathy, in that the individual is elevated in his or her own eyes, and the victim is dehumanized, is made to seem unimportant compared to me, and someone that I can take advantage of because, I need something from this person, and what I need is what is important. That's narcissism. Well, number two, Machiavellianism, that comes from the name of a famous political scientist, Machiavelli, who advocated that in political dealings you had to be manipulative, you had to be cutthroat, you had to be willing to lie, and to be able to gain and maintain power, that you had to be a pretty nasty individual and be basically amoral, that it wasn't a matter of right and wrong, it's just a matter of what worked and what gained you power. And so a lot of emphasis on manipulating other people to get your way with them. So anyway, these three traits have been shown to be strongly predictive of criminal behavior. And as with these other traits that we talked about previously, These are thought to be consistent pattern types of behaviors that people show, consistent over time, over the years, over the decades, from childhood. You're able to see the rudiments, the beginning of these traits in childhood, in the earliest of years, even among toddlers and even newborns. You can see some of these differences. You're not going to see Machiavellianism and that kind of stuff in newborns, but it's stuff that begins to emerge early in life, and so it's thought to be quite heavily rooted in early childhood experiences and in the sort of genetic inheritance that you're born with and how your brain develops. So developmental pathways in the brain and all of that, the wiring of the brain is seen to be at the foundation of where these traits come from. So it's an internal focus as opposed to these other disciplines' external focus. Another way of thinking of it is, I mentioned before how the sociological or economic sort of approaches tend to look at an individual as being someone who's pulled around in life, like a pawn on a chessboard. You get pulled to different places. Where you end up in life depends on how you get pulled. Well, think of these internal traits as possibly as pushes, that they're from the inside and they're pushing you in different directions. So if you're someone who has the dark triad, you score high on those three traits, that you have this disposition, this tendency that pushes you towards manipulation, exploitation of other people. So again, I think this chapter is important because it really does fill in the blank, this missing part of, well, what about the inside of a person, right? And doesn't that matter too? Research indicates that criminals tend to have brains wired at low levels of arousal, which makes them sensation seeking. This supports a theory that's known as arousal theory. This is an interesting theory that, again, is very much one based in the processes of the brain, the way the brain is wired. So it's the idea behind this is that everybody needs a certain amount of stimulation in their lives to avoid boredom, to feel like you're entertained, to feel like you got enough going on in your life to keep you busy, to keep you occupied, and to avoid serious levels of boredom. But everybody's set point is set differently about how much stimulation you need to be satisfied. So if you're someone who's wired a certain way, that you might be perfectly happy to sit in a corner and read a book in a quiet room in the library or something, and you might be perfectly entertained doing that sort of simple activity. And another person whose brain is wired differently may just be bored out of their mind with that kind of activity, and instead they would rather be doing crazy things that are super exciting, but also from another person's point of view, extremely dangerous, maybe life-threatening. The person sitting in the chair reading a book would look at that person and go, "Oh my gosh, I don't want to do jump out of airplanes or do ultimate fighting or extreme sports that'll get myself killed. That's too stimulating for me. I'm terrified of that idea, that kind of thing." So it's this idea that people have different amounts of craving for stimulation, and that the criminally prone have extreme, a high level of desire for extreme sensations, for super stimulating activities. If you rob a bank, that's pretty exciting stuff, and it's not going to be boring. Might be too exciting for me, but it might be exciting in a positive way for someone who's criminally inclined. And so what this theory is saying is that the person who's criminally prone, their brain is set at this sort of lower level where normal sensations are not enough for them. And so they need this excess level of stimulation to get satisfied. That's this arousal thing, that it takes more for them to feel aroused, that meaning kind of excited and entertained and stimulated. It takes more for them to find that satisfactory level, and that crime provides that stimulation. A leading psychologist in this area of individual differences, looking at the inside, looking at the brain, internal traits, is Hans Eysenck, and he passed away years ago, but still he's sort of a foundational leader in this area. And he hypothesized that conscience was really important for crime, and if you have a strong, well-developed conscience, then you'll avoid criminal behavior. And he hypothesized that the way that a conscience gets developed is through what psychologists call operant conditioning, which means to learn through reinforcement. Again, some more technical terms, but what they mean by operant conditioning or learning through reinforcement is the idea that if you, every time you misbehave, you get punished for it and you experience a little sting, you get time out from mom and dad, or you get lectured, or you lose certain privileges and have things taken away, or receive a spanking or something like that. Whatever the punishment is, that it provides an opportunity for the child to learn that, wow, that bad behavior doesn't pay, or that bad behavior results in punishment, which I do not like. And so next time I'm going to be less likely to do that bad behavior because I don't like what comes after it. Really, this is very similar to self-control theory in that, according to self-control theory, you learn to control yourself and to stay out of crime by being corrected many, many times over the years when you're a child by your parents or other caregivers. And that every time you get corrected, you're like, wow, that didn't work out. That bad behavior that I did was followed by punishment. And so I'm going to stop doing that because I don't like to get punished. So that was one avenue that Eysenck thought that a person developed a real healthy, good conscience. And the second one is called classical conditioning, which is also important in psychology, what classical conditioning is that you pair together, like say a negative emotional response, like feeling guilty, gets paired together with, say, like a bad behavior or something. So let's say that your parents punish you for I don't know, stealing a cookie from the cookie jar or something. It's doing something you weren't supposed to do, so you get punished for it. Through reinforcement, you learn not to do that anymore because you learn that unpleasant things follow bad behavior, and so you learn not to do it. But by classical conditioning, it's kind of learning through a different way. So when you do that bad thing, you steal the cookie from the cookie jar, you get lectured by mom, and she makes you feel guilty, makes you feel bad about what you did, and over time, your brain connects those two things together, where when you steal, you feel guilty because your brain pairs it together based on your experiences. Oh yeah, whenever I do something bad, mom makes me feel guilty, and so in my brain I put guilt and bad behavior together. And so over the years, as you grow and mature, you develop a strong conscience through this matching of bad experiences or bad behavior with bad feelings and that come with it. Your brain hooks the two together, links the two, and so every time you do something bad, you feel bad, even if mom doesn't catch you or nobody catches you. You'll feel bad anyway because you've learned to feel that way when you behave badly. So I think even though he was someone who focused a lot on personality and the importance of genes and biology, he also recognized the importance of this conditioning, this learning, which is emphasized by psychologists who put more emphasis on learning and the environment as opposed to genes. Criminals are thought to be insensitive to punishment and thus do not learn from experiences. This is put forward as a hypothesis about how criminals differ from non-criminals. It's this idea that you and I, who could be sensitive to punishment, like, for example, I have a younger brother. I remember when I was a kid that every time he was punished, all my parents had to do was frown at him, and he would start to cry. You feel guilty, you feel bad, without even being punished, just by mom and dad showing some disapproval. My other brother, 2 years younger, was much less sensitive to disapproval or sensitive punishment. You might punish him really strictly and he'd be like, that was nothing, you know. And so he wouldn't feel it and wouldn't learn from as much, although he's turned out to be, as a grown man, has turned out to be a well-behaved guy too. But there, you could see differences between the kids, and some people learn quickly from their mistakes. Other people are more stubborn, more resistant to learning lessons from punishment. And these psychologists locate that in the brain, that some people are wired to be sensitive to unpleasantness, sensitive to punishment, and other people are just kind of it bounces off of them. The punishment bounces off of them, and they don't learn quickly from their mistakes. So that's another avenue by which people, these psychologists say that a criminal can develop criminal tendencies. Let's stop it right there. We're 15 minutes into the lecture here. I like to keep these short, so we'll stop here, but then pick it up in the next section where we left off.